I flicked the cigarette up and caught it in my mouth with a flick of my wrist. It was a cheap trick I learned as a kid from seeing Robert Mitchum or James Dean or one of those film noir pseudo-badasses who always seemed to have a lit cigarette dangling from their lower lip. After 2 weeks of abstinence, I figured that just champing a fresh out-of-the-pack Marlboro Red without putting a lighter to it would be pleasant enough and wouldn't evoke such alarm from any of my supportive pals if one of them did happen to catch me with it. At least not yet. In fact, the barrel of the .38 caliber that was grinding its way into the back of my neck and the aroused, pervert-sounding breath of the guy who was holding it, there were starting to appear like a much bigger threat in the broad scheme of my personal priorities at that point in the evening. Someone clearly needed my attention, but considering that my brains hadn't already gone on a permanent hiatus from my skull, there was always the hope that whatever happened wouldn't be the end of the world. At least not yet. "Tusk," said the calm voice behind me. 2 weeks, Smokey. It's been 2 weeks since you smelled like the ashtray in a St. James cat house, and you can't even get through one Halloween night without sucking on one of those dreadful small tumor sticks in the Rouge's stairwell. I'll let you in on a little secret, Johnny boy. Half of your patients don't even need anesthetic. Your nasty smoker's breath might knock 'em out. I snipped the cigarette from my lip with my right hand while raising my left hand in the air. All right, Denny. I would have quit years ago if I had recognized how concerned you were about my health. That kind of gets me right here. I smacked my chest. That kind of gets me right here. Dr. Denny Sixman smiled and took the .38 caliber gun from the back of my neck to just above my occipital bun. "Oh, Johnny," he added, "I'm gonna get you right there. And then put 2 in the back of your head for good measure. As the poet put it, the hour groweth late. It's time to start walking. We have 4 flights of stairs to go before the ICU notices that our Johns Hopkins educated asses are AWOL. I stay put, gun in my back pocket. Goddamn sheep out of the way hospital. There are no security cameras in the stairwells. Excellent choice, St. Flamby Rouge. Do you mean? I queried. That's right, Denny said. Meat locker. The final destination. Do you think the ER or the intensive care unit will notice that their chief of internal medicine is missing? I inquired. Not in enough time, Dr. Sixman chuckled. Jesus Christ, look at your ego. Dr. Deckman, have a wonderful Halloween. The intensive care unit is the usual fucking spook show that it always is this time of year. And the ER can't even keep up with the line of party boys and girls that is currently coming through the doors. It looks like the line of the Louvre. Apparently, the kids have nothing better to do on Samhain than come up with creative and innovative ways to murder themselves. This year, there's a thing called vodka eyeballing. Ah, Denny, do I really want to know? I asked. Probably not, he said. At the very least, no more than I did. Let's just say it involves drinking twice as much vodka as normal, but all you need for fun is 2 excellent tear ducts. Jesus feathery Christ. I mumbled. What the hell is wrong with these kids? I blame the emos, Denny said, sounding just like Honest John. These slit-not-listening little dinwads can think of 18 different ways to get wasted, but not one of them can think of a way to get laid. Where, I wonder, is their value system? Sometimes, Johnny, I can't believe how much things have changed since you and I were kids. How did things get so out of hand? I wondered, adding, speaking of which, how did you get a gun? Took it off a banger that we treated here last week, he told reporters. I let him go without it until the cops arrived. The poor youngster was crushed. He said that his daughter had given it to him for Father's Day. Anyway, enough of that, doctor. This isn't a tea party, and we're not going far enough before you reach your goal. We have to make the most of the time we have. Get your $1 moving, Deckman, and on your way, talk to me. Tell me about the Jane Doe they found in the La Loro Estate Cemetery last week. Dr. Sixman shoved behind my ear with the revolver. I pushed open the door to the next set of steps, the 4th flight thus far. What? Denny, what do you want to know? I whispered as I took the first few steps down. As much as you can tell me, Dr. Deckman. Sixman said. Go on. Jane Doe was found in the cemetery behind the La Lauro estate and brought to the emergency room of the St. Flammy Rouge at just past midnight on Wednesday morning, according to the statement. Though she was barely coherent, we believe she was trying to tell us her name was Ophelia Delacroix. We've already run a statewide search on that moniker in all spellings, and so far, we've come up snake eyes on an Ophelia Delacroix fitting her description. We've widened the scope of our search to include the Jane Doe is a white female between the ages of 69 and 75 who may be of Cajun ancestry. When she was located in the cemetery, she was bashing her head and fists against Gaston La Lauro's headstone, screaming that she had lost her notes. The attending officer, a rookie called Francis Delmarone, stated she had turned to him and said, quote, "The great rusher of fools. My notes are with the rusher of fools. Only notes, my lovely." This was soon before she bit her tongue almost in half. The woman experienced hemorrhage from both eyelids and a missing orbital in her right socket. The bruises and contusions on her head were consistent with her inflicting a concussion on herself, and she was initially diagnosed as such. Her condition the next day, on the other hand, threw everyone for a loop. Dr. Sixman came to a halt in front of me, and I turned to face him. "How was her health?" he inquired. "You know damn well what her situation was, Denny," I whispered. She started to rot. There is no other way to put it. Blood began to trickle from the beds of her fingernails as the blood flowing from her eyes grew and darkened. His hair began to fall out in clumps, and her skin began to swell, darken, and, I guess the best word for it is fester. It was unable to collect accurate fingerprints. To even attempt a positive identification on her, we had to send DNA samples and dental records upstate. Dr. Sixman lowered the cannon to half-mast and smiled in an over-theatrical, "I know something you don't know" style. "That's all very fine, Dr. Deckman. Very scientific. You had an older lady, apparently dying of an unknown illness, maybe viral, with wounds consistent with a severe concussion. So far, what kind of follow-up have you done?" "Well," I said, "besides trying to identify her and examine her for evidence of a yet unknown virus, her symptoms seem to match those of the secondary stages of leprosy. I guess what I'm asking, Dr. Johnny, is did you even bother to get off your chain-smoking ass and put that Johns Hopkins mind to work investigating the background of this poor lady at all?" said Dr. Sixman with a growl. "Have you done any research? Was there any personal interest in her background? And did you notice Jane Doe was as dead as a fucking disco this morning? Bagged, labeled, and placed in the freezer for safety." My hand shot up again. "Whoa, Denny. I knew you cared," I said. "You've always had that extraordinary sympathy for your patients that I lack. You've always gone the extra emotional mile. After all these years, I still admire you for it. I'm not saying I don't. And she's no longer alive. She died yesterday, huh? Didn't the incident pique your interest?" Her babbling had been getting worse and worse, and then the incident, he queried, ignoring the query. "Didn't it make you want to dig a little deeper, Johnny?" Jane Doe had been babbling incoherently for the last 2 days. She'd been asking the same questions over and over. Where has the healer gone? The obsessive-compulsive repetition of phrases and ideas is not uncommon in those suffering from severe shock trauma. With a high temperature and profound delirium, it's almost a foregone outcome. The healer, I told Dr. Sixman, me notes. The brute man. The poor soul. No, the pure soul. That poor, pure soul. Imbeciles. The healer's notes. The great rusher of fools. She kept repeating those sentences with what little tongue she had left. It sounded like a damned chant. Actually, it was more comparable to a filibuster, until Denny nodded, as if he agreed that my thoughts had followed his line of inquiries. "The incident," Denny went on to explain. "Tell me about the incident, Dr. Deckman, in which the patient performed a little elective surgery on herself, in a manner of speaking." Denny, for Christ's sake, you were there. I said, why the hell? Perhaps my little friend here is just curious. He added as he leveled the gun at my face. Please tell me about the situation. As if your life depended on it. We were all in the room, I began, forcing a big swallow. You were there, Angela, Dr. Hodgins, and I. We'd given the patient a very light sedative. Enough to keep her infirmities at bay and hopefully elicit anything understandable from her. Call her Ophelia, growled Dr. Sixman. What? I wondered. My little friend here loves first names, he added, brandishing the 38 in my face. Unlike you, he's a softy who wants to know who we're talking about on a more personal level. Jonathan. Her name is Ophelia. We asked Ophelia to tell us who she was talking about. I told her. Who were the fools, the brutish man, and the pure soul? Jane Doe. Ophelia. She simply grinned and began blinking her remaining eye. When we asked her about the great rusher of fools, hell's lid flew off. You recall. She grabbed your left forearm and a fistful of your jacket and began shaking you, saying, put it back. Return that, you wuss. Return it. In the midst of her traumatic episode, her tongue detached and fell out of her mouth, already rotting in its oral socket. The surge of blood that followed was entirely black, as if it had disintegrated or been badly oxidized. Dr. Sixman smirked, satisfied, with the twisted grin of a sadist. What did Ophelia do after that? He inquired. I fixed my focus on Dr. Sixman. She began to laugh. I stated, actually, cackle, as if one's last scrap of sanity had finally gone away. Then she let go of you and turned to Dr. Hodgins, saying as clearly as anyone can without a tongue, guess I won't need this anymore. Her cackling grew louder, and she started to claw her own eye out. We tried to control her, but by the time she tapped out, she had dug through the cornea and was clinically blind. Had you ever wondered why, of all places, they found her in the La Laurove State Cemetery? I'd gotten lost in my head, fallen into the abyss of a horrific dream that I'd been compelled to repeat. But that question, the strangeness of it, drew me back to reality. I'm not going any further, I told Denny. Excuse me, he inquired. I said I wasn't going to lift a fucking foot unless you can force me to ride your ass piggyback at gunpoint, Denny. Go ahead and use my thoughts to paint the stairwell. Hell, they've needed to redo these walls for quite some time. Dr. Sixman moved in close and pushed the gun's barrel to my brow. Now, Dr. Deckman, he smirked, why do I have the sneaking suspicion that you're calling my bluff right now? That you think I'm playing one of my usual All Hallows Eve pranks, and that I'm about to break character and start laughing, and we're going to be puffing on that fucking cancer rod in your pocket in the pavilion in a few minutes. Well, my little buddy here, he tipped the gun at me. Well, he's starting to lose his cool with your lack of respect. He sincerely wants to tell you what's on his mind, Johnny, but the problem is that once he starts talking, he starts shooting his mouth off. What am I saying? So just pick up that $300 loafer and haul your $1 up the next flight of stairs before I forget we went to med school together and lose that beautiful, compassionate streak you accuse me of harboring. I turned around and pushed open the door to the next stairway, which had 3 flights so far. I'll tell you what, Denny joked. How about I do some of the talking for a while? We can take a break when we arrive at the next landing. We came to a standstill in front of the door at the bottom of the 3rd-story stairwell. I began to wonder why, of all places, Ophelia Delacroix would wander into the cemetery of the old locked La Laurove estate. How was she going to enter the cemetery? When Dr. Tiberna La Laurove left to concentrate on her latest research project, she had that location sealed tighter than a librarian's cervix. So, why did Ophelia Delacroix want to enter that exact graveyard so badly, out of all the godforsaken, fly-blown swamps in Louisiana? Wetland, I joked. What? Dr. Sixman inquired, clearly agitated. We don't call them swamps anymore, Denny, I said, adding, Louisiana now has wetlands. Doesn't that bother you? You can't just be the head of internal medicine at some podunk, catfish-loving, fortune-telling Saint Swamp Rat Boonies General, can you? No, you must be the chief thoracic surgeon at Wetland University's teaching hospital in the prestigious Backwoods Acres owned by philanthropist, Nobel laureate, Sir Muskrat Tonguefucker III. Now, as previously indicated, most inhabitants are aware of the history of the Manor La Lauro. I've just heard bits, but it's enough to make me want to do further investigation. The name estate is an undeservedly attractive euphemism for plantation in the dark, and shall we say, colorful past of the La Lauro estate. It was built on the flayed, scarred backs of the African slaves who built and carried it, all the way back to the original Gaston La Lauro, who came to America with a tidy sum from relatives who had swindled and cheated a fortune in their own right from fellow slave traders in Normandy and Burkina Faso. The La Lauro legacy was built on human anguish and lubricated with the blood of all who came into contact with it. Gaston's ashes were deposited in the manor's barnyard, alongside those of his second wife and young son. On the night they dragged Ophelia Delacroix into the Flammy Rouge, they found her shouting and thrashing herself against his headstone. "What a happy family story," I exclaimed. Dr. Sixman chuckled. "Those are only the bodies we know about. Clearly, a number of slaves died during the tough plantation days. Do you believe they were given large, prominent headstones and heartfelt eulogies? Wishing you the best of luck, buddy." The only persons who got grave markers on that site were the numerous generations of La Lauros and a few outside souls who had taken pity on them. Tiberna's childhood friend died of pancreatic cancer in the 1980s. As a courtesy to her mother, the estate's owner permitted her daughter to be buried in one of the family plots. Ernie Tribolox's story was another, less heartwarming one. Ernie had been a caretaker for 50 years, but his true passion was throwing dog fights for the villagers. He made a lot of money by transforming man's best buddy into Marmaduke's worst adversary. On Friday evenings, he'd get nice and loaded and charge into the kennels with a quart of wild turkey and an electric cattle prod. "You ain't going to injure those dogs, Mr. Tribolox, are you?" questioned one of the housekeepers one night. He just took a wild turkey belt and said to her, "Ma'am, I'm going to put so many volts of electricity up those dogs' asses that they'll be doing that Snoopy dance from the Charlie Brown Christmas special before I'm done." On his 69th birthday, Ernie and his wild turkey made their weekly trip to the dog kennels to make his mutts do their regular Friday night performance. But you know what, Johnny? If one of those dogs didn't grow to the size of a maid or even a butler and somehow open the kennel doors before he arrived, he'd be damned. When old Ernie got close enough, the hounds burst through the gates and did the Snoopy dance all over Tribolox and his cattle prod. The grimace on what was left of his face told you that he had no idea what had hit him or how a gang of mutts who were meant to freeze at the sight of him had ever gotten the upper hand. He was given a closed casket funeral and was buried 3 days later in the La Lauro family cemetery. And there they lay. The brute man, Ernie Tribolox. The pure soul, Tiberna's friend, Krista Stevens. The imbecile, Maurice La Lauro. And the great rusher of fools, himself, Gaston La Lauro, the 17th. "What are you getting at, Denny?" I asked. Dr. Sixman's countenance became gloomy. "Have you ever heard of Le Fin Absolute Damon's prophecy?" he inquired. "Dr. Deckman, we have 2 flights left. Keep going." I opened the stairwell to the 2nd floor. The air was thick and musty within. I was abruptly transported back to 5th grade and having to read Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. I recall the nauseatingly stifling air in the catacombs and Fortunato passionately pleading, "For the love of God, Montresor," as the vindictive lunatic began to wall Fortunato up alive. "For God's sake, Dr. Denny." Doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? "Stop when you get to the bottom of the stairwell," Dr. Sixman said. "We'll finish the denouement of our conversation when we get there." I turned around as I reached the door at the bottom of the landing. We were right there. We'd be one level down. At the door of the St. Flamby Rouge's meat locker, as it was popularly known. Not exactly a person's final destination, but the first stop along the way. There weren't many more stations till the sadly departed had their final retribution, whether from drawer to ditch or freezer to oven. "That's good enough," Dr. Sixman answered. "I almost wish I'd let you have that last cigarette when I met you upstairs, Johnny. It's a shame this stale, foul garbage is the last air you'll ever breathe." I reached into my coat pocket for a Marlboro Red and commented, "Not too late, Denny." Denny raised his rifle as if to say, "Nice try," and I removed my hand from my pocket. "This La Fin Absolute Damon," I exclaimed. "Tell me about it." Dr. Sixman sighed and leaned back against the guardrail, resuming his storyteller role. "La Fin Absolute Damon," he explained. "There are two possible translations. Either the absolute end of the world, or hell will absolutely swallow the living. The original prophecy was crude and written in an uneducated code to keep slave masters and upper-class bigoted murderers at bay. This isn't a recent prophecy, you see. This dates back to when the first La Loro arrived in America, when Haitian Santeria and African voodoo were in full swing. The prophecy, promised by the tribe's elder seers, states that the evil of the La Loro bloodline will meet the likes of a genuine black magic boker in several generations, and the two will bring about the end of life. The how and when were left cryptically unanswered. The first Mrs. La Loro, on the other hand, was reported to have gotten multiple copies of the ancient incantation used to summon the Daemon Profane, one of the most heinous and wicked destroyers of the old world, who fantasized of opening the portal to hell and taking our living souls through it to meet the horrors that lie within. True Lovecraftian gibberish. The remains of the 5 sacrifices would be required for the incantation. The child, born lame, the ogre, the Eye of Innocence, the Death Eater, and the one who hasn't changed a single word, the Great Rusher of Fools. That's when I started making connections. The child, born lame, the idiot, the brute man or the ogre, the Eye of Innocence, or the pure soul. Perhaps the Death Eater is the healer, and the Great Rusher of Fools. Well, who knows? I wondered, what if? What if? Is it true that the first Mrs. La Loro was only ever known as that? Mrs. Gaston La Lorox only. What was her prior identity? Prior to her marriage and departure? Perhaps before she promised to return. Mrs. La Loro could have been named Ophelia Delacroix. Maybe, just maybe, she came back. The age range is adequate. The same is true for the physical description. Ms. Delacroix may have returned to fulfill their destiny and raise the Daemon Profane. All of the other sacrifices had already been made on the estate, in the graveyard. Maybe all she needed was the ultimate sacrifice. The role of the healer, perhaps her daughter. Tibernella Loro, doctor. My blood froze. And after I finished my schoolwork and drew a tiny Magnum PI, I found myself in the cemetery, face to face with Gaston La Loro, the 17th gravestone. With a small rock-collecting hammer, I chipped away at the stone. I brought it to the hospital that night to show Ophelia and see how she reacted. But I never got a chance to take it out of my pocket before she grabbed my arm and put it back. I said, spellbound, "God damn you, put it back." She couldn't have, Denny stated clearly. There was no other way. Even the luckiest of coincidences couldn't explain that one. Then, the final tumbler was placed into position. I had a dream around 3:03 a.m. on Saturday. I was standing outside the meat locker when Ophelia Delacroix's naked form appeared like a shadow on the wall in front of me and began to whisper, "My healer," she said. "I finally found my healer," she remarked, and I immediately realized who she was speaking to. Dr. Sixman smirked and raised the gun to eye level, cocking the hammer. "Whoa! Whoa!" I screamed. Now I can only imagine what weird, bizarre fucking purpose the old bag may have for wanting to bring about the apocalypse. But Denny, you're a doctor for Christ's sake. What possible purpose could you have for wanting to help her? I have my reasons, Denny replied. We'll call it faith. Call it karma. Maybe it's time to call it quits. Perhaps you can ask the little girl who died of AIDS after an unknown assailant with HIV abducted her from her front porch and raped her repeatedly before abandoning her behind a dumpster when he was finished. Perhaps you could ask the wives in the Middle East whose noses were severed by jealous, abusive husbands who mistakenly suspected them of infidelity. Perhaps you could ask the priest who was forced to amputate his own eyes at gunpoint after Satanists high on angel dust broke into the church on Elmwood. Whatever you want to name it. When I look at the evil and hatred that has engulfed the world, I see us as God's failed experiment. A half-hearted attempt to bring beauty and good intentions into a world that never had place for them. Believe me when I tell that life will be a lot better without us. I'm glad you're not a fertility doctor, Denny, I said, because if our first few attempts at having children failed, wouldn't we all be hacksawing our nuts off? Keep it moving, funny man, Sixman said as he nudged me with the gun. Maybe you can laugh yourself to death. We went down and eventually located it. The entrance of the morgue of Saint Flamby Rouge. Cold, gloomy, and conclusive. Open it, Dr. Sixman urged. Here's a thought, I said. Hell no. What? In what world does it make sense for a fucker who doesn't want to die to argue with a psychopath who has a gun to his head? Dr. Sixman asked, placing the .38 solidly to my brow. I reached deep under my lab coat, drew the Dirty Harry special from its holster, and aimed it firmly at Dr. Denny Sixman's crotch. A world where the fucker who doesn't want to die has a loaded .357 Magnum pointed right at the psychopath's balls. I went on to explain. Jesus messed with a monkey, yelled Dr. Sixman. Deckman, hold the fire. I have a confession to make. Denny let go of the .38 and tossed it on the ground. I swear to God, it was all in good fun, he exclaimed. Even if it wasn't one of my funniest ones at the time, it was my All Hallows Eve prank. The first one in years that was finally going to work. Angela was complicit in the scheme. Mum, I said in a tell me another asshole tone, and it was finally my turn to aim a gun at him. Deckman, my .38 wasn't even loaded, he exclaimed. Well, that's just bad planning, Dr. Sixman, I said, cocking the hammer. Denny tried to calm himself by asking, the prophecy, the absolute end of the world. Man, that's been around longer than any of us have. What about the Damon profane notes? That was just a fortunate coincidence. Deckman, every year on Halloween, I attempt to mislead you, and you always see straight through it. If there's a boker around here, it's you son of a bitch. I'm not sure how you do it. So when an elderly lady was discovered babbling nonsense near the alleged birthplace of the apocalypse this year, I got the idea. And what about her rants about the 5 players lining up with the 5 participants of the Damon profane summoning spell? How could I say no when it was so fucking perfect? She grabbed my coat and began ranting about putting it back, and no one knows what she was talking about. She most certainly didn't either. Just some insane old lady screaming insane crap. Dr. Sixman regained his breath and ran his fingers through his hair as he tried to calm himself. Was this a wise decision? He inquired. I doubt it. Was it appropriate? On that one, I have to say no. But Johnny, I just wanted to piss off my best friend in the world on Halloween night. Is there really something so wicked about that? I shrugged, my gun in my right hand. Denny continued, let me tell you what you're going to see when you open that door, Deckman. Angela is already waiting for us inside the meat locker. She whipped us here, laid Ophelia Delacroix on her slab, stuck her arms out, and forced her to give us both middle fingers. Happy Halloween, Dr. Dickman. Angie will exclaim once you open the door. God willing. Will she? I inquired. Do you mean Angela? I pushed open the door to see Angela Sixman in a rolling chair beside the cold-ass drawers, a 357 magnum hole in her forehead, her pallid face suffused with amazement and bewilderment, which had turned to full and absolute vacancy. It was so loud and high-pitched that it would have been humorous in any other context. "Deckman, wait, what the fuck did you do?" Sixman shouted. "Gee, Denny," I remarked. "I guess someone forgot that here in the dirty, ex-Confederate South, you still have to check the phone lines to make sure no one else is on them. I heard you and that nasty bitch over there scheming to kill me in this godforsaken hole yesterday morning. That's when I decided to bring my own small companion to work with me. Dr. Sixman, you want to catch them before they catch you. It's the way of the world, which is unfortunate but true." "You wretched motherfucker," Denny cried through his tears. "You cocksucking, loony rat bastard." "Now, Denny," I replied, "you kiss that stiff, room-temperature bitch with your filthy mouth. Pull the latch on Ophelia Delacroix's locker. Do it right now." Dr. Sixman appeared to return to reality at that point. He grabbed Ophelia's drawer and wrenched the cabinet door open. Her foul odor immediately filled the room. He stifled a gag with the crook of his elbow. Even after it had been embalmed, Delacroix's sightless corpse had begun to discolor and putrefy. With a dry heave, my throat clenched. "Johnny," Dr. Sixman said, "you've done a terrible thing, but this is equally your fault and mine. Much more. You murdered an innocent woman, but I will testify that you were deceived into believing it was in self-defense. You did not put yourself in this situation. I did. I'm not going to budge on this either. It's known as the felony murder rule. I'm responsible for around 30 years of my life. I'll be right there with you, fighting this beast beside you. Don't make me lose my best friend when I just lost my wife. Aren't you just an angel on earth? Get on top," I shouted, bringing my magnum to his face. He appeared to have been smacked in the face with an ice water pail. What?" he stammered, his eyes watering. I broke out laughing. "I swear, Denny, our Ms. Delacroix was sweet on you when she was still breathing. Now I'm going to do you a favor and assist you in rebounding," I added, motioning the pistol towards her limp corpse. "You two are going to spend the last few hours of your lives together." "This is madness," Dr. Sixman screamed. "You're finally off your tree, Johnny." Dr. Sixman climbed cautiously onto Ophelia Delacroix's corpse. His elbow slid into her abdomen for a brief moment, causing a terrible burst of flatulence to explode from her rectum. Sixman clenched his hands and said, "Fuck me." "Well," I commented, "you two will have plenty of alone time together, which could be a serious possibility." Dr. Sixman elevated his head from his missionary stance on top of Ophelia's swelling corpse. "Johnny," he added, "pay attention to me. You'll realize what a terrible mistake you've made. When this happens, please know that I understand and forgive you. Johnny, you're my best friend. You'll realize what you've done, and it won't be too late. Johnny, come back here and get me. We'll get through it together. I made a terrible mistake, but it doesn't have to be the end of the world. We'll get through it." My smile had vanished. "For the love of God, Montresor," I said. Denny glared at me as I slid the drawer containing him and Ophelia into the wall. "Johnny, come back and get me," he sobbed. "Please don't leave me in here." I slammed the cupboard door in his face. Angela's vacant eyes peered up at me from her slouched chair position. I approached her and began scraping the phony bullet wound from her forehead with my thumb. Instead of falling off completely, it began to fall off in clumps, smearing the pale makeup beneath it. I have no idea how these Hollywood makeup artists do it. I informed her, in my best Danny Glover impression, "I'm getting too old for this shit, Riggs." "Like hell you are. Sugar tits," Angela said in her best Mel Gibson voice. "So, here's the question of the hour." I thought to myself, how long do we keep Happy Boy in there before we tell him the joke's on him? "That's not the question of the hour," she continued. "The burning question is whether he'll kiss you on the lips or bust you in the balls once he finds out. Perhaps he'll surprise us both and kiss me right on the balls," I joked, adding, "Will he be amused by you turning traitor and switching sides, Or will you be spending the better part of November at the Four Seasons after this? I might end up earning a few extra B&B points on my account next month, Angela speculated. But maybe he can spend some of that alone time remembering how funny the live sewer rat in my toilet was, and then wonder why I would ever switch sides in the first place. Furthermore, the man had to learn that you don't fuck with Halloween's king. We both laughed when we said this. Tell you what, I continued, reinserting the Marlboro Red into my lips. How about we have a smoke together and then let the poor horse's ass out? After all, a joke is a joke, but then there's cruelty. 2 weeks, Johnny, Angela replied as she pulled the cigarette from my mouth. Do you really want to screw that up? My cell phone rang in my pocket out of nowhere. Unbelievable, I said. I can't get a signal on the roof to save my life, but someone can reach me 3 stories below street level. Keep that in mind. This is Dr. Deckman, I said as I answered the phone. Johnny, it's Ted. His voice was a little distant, but otherwise as clear as a bell on my cell phone in the sub-basement. Oh my goodness, have we found the granddaddy of all clusterfucks? This is bad, Johnny. So terrible. What I'm about to tell you is unlike anything we've ever seen. Don't interrupt. Don't ask me how I got my information. Just know that I did it, and I wish I hadn't. Homeland Security and the CDC are officially labeling this as need-to-know information, and you've never needed to know anything more in your life. You'll need to quarantine the entire hospital. No one enters or exits. The only exception will be ambulance drivers who have made drop-offs since Wednesday or later. They must be immediately recalled and returned to the hospital for containment. Ted, what in the hell are you talking about? I asked him. It's your patient, he explained. The Jane Doe for whom you sent the DNA sample and dental records. You asked me to get a positive identification on her. We already know who she is, Ted, I explained. Her name was Ophelia Delacroix. She was 69 to 75 years old when she died of an unknown disease. Wrong, Ted exclaimed. Wrong. Wrong. Nothing could be more wrong. Her name was not Ophelia Delacroix, and the disease had already been identified. Johnny, this is going to sound like some Twilight Zone nonsense, but you're going to have to believe me, and then you're going to have to get on the stick and shut down that hospital right away. You must. Promise me. I swear it. I promise you, Ted, I said. Okay, he said, and I could hear him steeling himself to continue. This is straight from the feds and their field liaisons at the CDC. They are still gathering intel, but what they've come up with is this. The patient's name, Patient Zero, if you will, is Dr. Tiberna LaLauro. She is 37 years old. She and a team of doctors, microbiologists and scientists were working on a highly classified project in the Ophelia Dumont Wetland Laboratories called the Delacroix Initiative. Using bacterial life from the wetlands, they were trying to create a catch-all vaccine for just about every virus, infection, or carcinogen known to man. Wishful thinking. They didn't think so. However, the best laid plans of mice and men. Something went horribly wrong. What seemed like the miracle vaccine, the serum, it took on a life of its own. Somehow, it mutated into a type of safe haven for viral entities to adapt and strengthen themselves. The antivirus became an uber disease that evolves and progresses faster than the human body can fight it off. Tiberna saw the warning signs of this and begged her crew to stop working immediately. She pleaded with them to neutralize the serum and abandon the experiment before they could no longer contain what they had created. The director, Dr. Harvey Profane, however, would go behind his own mother's back if he thought that it would win him the Nobel Prize for Medicine. He sent samples of their initial concoction everywhere and to every agency that would fund its patenting. Tiberna begged him to put it back, to recall the samples and bring them back to containment for immediate emulation before it was too late. Nevertheless, Profane has never been a man to be swayed when he thinks that he has found something of great value to put his name on. 3 members of Dr. LaLauro's crew died rapidly of extreme blood loss, anemia, cellular degeneration, and compromised immune systems. In her own words, her colleagues began rotting away right in front of her. Dr. Lawrence Brutman, Dr. Ian Besile, and Dr. Brutman's daughter, Janie. Tiberna was quite fond of Janie and mourned her loss as one of the purest souls that she had ever known. It soon became clear that there was no way of unringing the bell that the Delacroix initiative had rung, and Tiberna fled to her childhood home to collect some notes that she had created previously on eradication techniques of entire viral and bacterial strains deemed to be threats. Unfortunately for her, unfortunately for all of us, Dr. Lalaurie was unaware that she had already contracted Profane's Uber disease and had now become a carrier of it. Define irony. Dr. Profane had always wanted to be known for making his mark on the world of medicine. I guess in the end, he got his wish. I stammered into the phone. How bad is it? Forget smallpox, Ted said after a brief pause. Forget Ebola. Forget COVID-19 and consider the end of existence as we know it. Consider this. The 4 horsemen are on their way. Consider this. The end of the world has finally arrived at the party, and it has brought everything except the lubricant. My blood froze. Airstrikes with both hydrogen and sarin agents have been ordered over the Ophelia Dumont wetland region in an attempt to neutralize anything that may have survived. But Johnny, that still leaves everyone in St. Flamby Rouge, and the neighboring town, and the responding police force, and ambulances and ambulance drivers who passed through the danger zone. And, God help us, the samples. Those fucking samples. Only God knows how many of them were sent out. Ted stopped. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. I'm not a religious man, Johnny. Not by any means. But somehow I think that I'll find it in myself to make it to church tomorrow. I believe that I finally have something that deserves serious prayer for the first time in years. I only hope that there's still a God who's listened. Johnny, what is it? You look as if you've just been handed a death sentence. Johnny, I think we should let Denny out of that drawer right now. I'm starting to get. Leave him. I called out. Leave him in there. It's the kindest thing that we can do for him. Now, outside of. I looked down at the .357 Magnum in my hand, and an unexpected chuckle echoed inside of me, and I couldn't hold it in any longer, so I pressed the back of my hand against my temple. 2 weeks, he replied. 2 fucking weeks. Ain't that just about always the way? 40 years, and I make it a whole 2 weeks, just in time for the fucking horseman to show up. Shaking my head, I took the cigarette from my pocket, flipped it up, and placed it in my mouth. I think that it's time for that cigarette now, my dear, I murmured. I can't say for sure what comes next, but for right now, I think that it's finally just about time for that Marlboro Red. On my freshly acquired property, I've been living in a fifth wheel. The plan had been to build a house on the 2 acres of property, but the weather didn't cooperate. I reside in rural Nevada, and the winter weather can really throw a kink in your construction plans. Winter wasn't an ideal time to build because of the snow and the 50 miles per hour winds. Nonetheless, I have my fifth wheel and generator to keep me going over the winter. Actually, it's quite tranquil. It's like my very own ASMR, what with the howling wind and rain hitting the tin-like roof. Listening to nature's soothing sounds is how I generally fall asleep. Tonight is an exception. There was a light breeze and a light drizzle, but the silence came before I could fall asleep. The sound of a herding dog barking at what I presume is his flock of sheep from across the street. I toss and turn, but the constant barking makes it impossible for me to sleep. I'm angry. I understand that the dog is simply performing his job, but I need to be able to sleep in order to get to work on time in the morning. The bark has a hollow structure. The dog sounds more like an old man coughing than a canine in distress. Every 3 seconds, there's a low woof. I see him nipping at their heels, nudging the sheep in the right path. The barking eventually stops, and I fall asleep. It is not because of my alarm that I am awake. Unfortunately, The exhausted herding dog starts barking once more. When I'd pick up my phone, the time is 4 a.m. Okay. I'd have to get up in an hour anyhow for work, so trying to sleep with this racket would be worthless. I stand up and begin brewing my coffee. I'm paying attention to the dog's barking rhythm. Woof, 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 says the dog. Woof, woof, woof. He seemed to despise his work. I'm the same way, mate. To drown out the animal, I switch on the TV and put on a Netflix comfort movie. His barking increases, as if he realizes I tuned him out. I sigh and curse to myself. This is really starting to irritate me. I yell out the window. Shut up. However, before I can close the window, I see something. It's small, but it's there. The dog's tone has changed. He appears concerned, and instead of the typical coughing woof, I hear a terrified and biting bark. He's turned away from the flock, and I'm struggling to make out the image in front of me, which is obscured by morning mist and a lack of sunlight. There is a person in the field with uneven grass and feed strewn about. It's simply crouched behind a half-eaten hay bale. The dog and sheep are in the opposite far corner, clearly perplexed by the strange shape that has entered their domain. I try to force my eyes to focus, but the hay bale blocking it and the lack of proper sunlight make it impossible. Anxiety makes my heart race. Is this the cause of the dog's barking? Who is this individual? Is it a living being? It has to be that way. As far as I can tell, it has a very round head with a long neck and shoulders. Is that a real person? I close my window before I can stare any longer. Farmers are known to get up early, so perhaps the shape I'm seeing is one of them laying out the feed. Perhaps they're kids who saw me and crouched to hide their embarrassment. I try to rationalize as much as possible. I sat in near silence, trying to convince myself that whatever it was human. Perhaps it was an intruder who caused the dog so much distress. Should I contact the cops? But what if the person in question was a farmer? I realize I'm overreacting. I'm going to double-check that what I saw was one of the landowners. I refuse to let my brain take over. I just need to work up the courage to crack the window and peek out. I'm embarrassed to admit that it took me what seemed like an hour to muster the courage to look outside. I believe the fact that the dog has stopped barking has helped me finally gain that courage. I knew I should have done something sooner, but the relief of knowing the dog no longer perceives a threat pushed me to finally act. I slowly open the window and peer outside. The sun is now pulling oranges and pinks into the sky, making it a little brighter. Luckily, the field is empty. The only inhabitants are the sheep, who have returned to the field center, and the dog. Good. Now I can go to work and forget about everything. That is precisely what I do. Work was tedious, as it always is. I had forgotten about the dog and the person I had seen in the field. It's easy to convince yourself of what happened after some time has passed. When I looked out, I noticed a shape. That is it. There was no monster of the night or a murderer waiting for an ambush. I just saw a shape, though I'm not sure if that's what I saw. It could have been absolutely nothing. In the field, there is a shadow. So far, nothing has happened. I look across the field as I drive into my dirt driveway. I smile to myself as I watch the sheep graze the grass and the dog lie peacefully against the fence line. What a fool I was. I am an adult, and I let a small dog's bark frighten me for nothing. I go inside my trailer and prepare a package of ramen with a glass of sweet tea for dinner. It's not a 5-star meal, but it's all I have energy for after a night of insomnia. As the hours pass and the day turns into night, I eat my ramen, drink my tea, and watch my shows. I start to feel worried. What will I do if the barking resumes? What if they or it resurfaces? I try to rationalize and laugh it off, but fear overcomes logic, and my mind descends into panic as we approach nightfall. I decide to sleep on the pull-out futon in the living room of my fifth wheel. At the very least, the lighting and sound from the television will help to muffle any noise outside my trailer. I make my bed and watch a show I've seen 1,000 times on television. I let myself go. When I wake up, I am in a panic. The kind of panic you get when you know someone is watching and waiting for you. The television has been turned off, and the eerie illumination provided by the dim screen. I sit up and take a look around as my chest tries to catch a breath that somehow escapes me. I return my attention from the kitchen to the futon. Nothing. I take a breather before getting up to restart my show. I double-check that my door is locked and all windows are closed as I go. I'm embarrassed to admit that when I check the windows, I squint to avoid seeing anything I don't want to see. Something unfortunate catches my attention as I check the last window next to the futon. It was so quick and brief that I wasn't even sure it was ever there. But I believe I saw something peering out from behind a tree in my backyard. I didn't get a good look, but whatever it was appeared to have an unnaturally round head and 2 glowing eyes. I slammed the window cover shut and lie back down, my chest heaving once more. I tell myself, I didn't see anything. Your mind plays tricks on you when you're already panicked. I try to concentrate on the television, but I can hear my own small panicked voice in the back of my mind like an itch. We're getting there. It's not across the street anymore. It has arrived for us. What exactly does it want from me? Will it attempt to enter? I eventually calmed down after convincing myself that what I saw was most likely my own reflection or shadow. That was the decision I made. To be sure, I don't look back. I fell asleep while dreaming of glowing eyes and howling wind. Everything appears to be normal when I awake. I brew some coffee and toast a bagel. I go through the motions of getting ready for the day, and then I go through the motions of being an employee when I get to work. I'm not having a bad day, but it feels like I'm on autopilot. I blame it on lack of sleep. Today is Friday, which means I'll be home for the next 2 days. I'm afraid that if I don't have work to distract me, I'll go insane trying to ignore the glowing eyes that I keep telling myself I didn't see. I returned home and changed into my sweatpants. I put on the television and make myself a cup of hot tea. I skip dinner. My stomach churns as I prepare for the unavoidable. My gaze darts around the trailer, looking for movement. Any sound causes my ears to perk up. It appears that relaxation is impossible. Today, I don't even lay down. Instead, I sit on the edge of my futon, my eyes wired and bloodshot. After about 2 hours of doing nothing, I decided to take a deep breath and relax a little. I don't make a decision about sleep because sleep isn't an option. Even if I was exhausted, which I am not, the panic in my chest would prevent me from sleeping. I hear it around 2 a.m. a light tap on the door. My gaze darts to the trailer door and locks in, as if I'm trying to shoot lasers out of my eyes and into whatever is on the other side. I don't stand up and walk over to the door. I've seen enough horror films to know what comes next. I'm just sitting here waiting. Another low, consistent tapping sound comes from the window beside me. As I leap from the couch, my head jerks to the side. I just stand there, staring. Another 3-tap pattern. The sound is unmistakable. It's as if someone is trying to catch my attention on purpose. Tap, tap, and again. I knead onto the floor, my head in my hands. I'm tempted to scream. I want it to go away, but I refuse to acknowledge its presence. Tap, tap, and again. I begin chewing on my nails. Tap, tap, and again. This time, it's coming from the door, ruling out the possibility that the tap on the window was caused by a tree branch or something more logical than a nighttime creature. Rap, rap, and rap some more. The faucets are now banging. Loud knocks on the door beg me to open it. I will not. Then I hear something completely different, a low, gurgle-like giggle. It sounds like someone tried to laugh while holding a glass of water in their mouth. I'm shaking and sweating at this point. I'm powerless to stop myself. I'm tired and scared. I'm confused. Leave me alone. I scream. Nothing happens for a brief second. It's nearly too quiet. I reach for my phone to call the police, but the trailer shakes before I can. As I hear the window cover roll up in a quick whip motion, I squint my eyes shut. I can't look out the window. I can't look out the window. I can't look out the window. I'm rocking back and forth, quietly reminding myself. Minutes pass, and temptation strikes. I'm not sure what it is about the human brain, but whenever you tell yourself you shouldn't do something, the desire to do the opposite takes over. I squint. I need to close the blinds, I tell myself quietly. But I had to see for myself. I needed to know whether it was real or if I was going insane. I open my eyes and count to 3. I almost scream at what I see, but nothing comes out of my mouth. The most terrifying thing I've ever seen is standing on the other side of my window. The head is so smooth and round. The eyes are a metallic yellow color that reflects all of the light from my trailer. Its skinny neck appears out of proportion to the head it must transport. The nose is simply a U-shaped slit. But the mouth, oh God, the mouth. It has 3 times the normal number of teeth, all of which appear human. Its wide smile consumes the majority of this thing's face. Its smile alone reveals every tooth, and it's just looking at me, smiling. I make no movement. I freeze like a deer in headlights, my brain yelling at my legs to move, to run, to do anything but stand here and let this thing see me. But it has already occurred. It gradually tilts its head forward. It hits its head against the window before I can react. It does it over and over again. It is attempting to enter. My body's fear finally gives way to fight. I take my old revolver from the TV stand and load 3 bullets into it. I rushed outside and confronted it without thinking. "Leave me alone," I scream. It slowly turns away from the trailer and towards me, still smiling and oozing tar from its brow. I aim my weapon, pull the trigger, and it thuds to the ground. Relief floods my body, and I squeeze the trigger 2 more times without hesitation to ensure the thing is dead. I almost laugh out loud. It has been completed. It's finally completed. I take out my cell phone to call the cops and inform them that I had killed this thing on my property. As I reach into my pocket, I realize I've forgotten my phone inside. As I turn to go back inside, I notice a swarm of tiny lights appear around my trailer. I begin to walk forward, gun still in hand, to investigate these lights. As I get closer, I notice a round head and a tiny neck. These aren't any ordinary lights. Hundreds of reflective eyes are looking back at me. I turn to run back to my front door, but 3 of them are already inside my house, as I see through the window. They just stare at me. I kneel down and feel something on my shoulder. When I look to the side, I notice a hand with long bony fingers and inch-long nails. I'm aware that I'm unable to run. I'm guessing they're all over now. I let out a cry as I felt the nails dig into my skin. I should not have gone outside.